Hello and welcome to the Stand Up with Pete Dominic podcast daily, here Monday through Friday with news recaps and almost always two excellent guests joining me, usually experts in their fields, but always interesting conversations, often listener spotlights, and so much more. I'm defining the show because I've got a lot of new listeners, I think. So many new folks signing up as well to support the show. Thank you very much. If you haven't signed up, go to standupwithpete.com right now to support the work I'm doing each and every day here. This is my job. I'm coming at you from the solar-powered shed in Rockland County, New York. It is the day before Thanksgiving. I will be here tomorrow and Friday as well. Well, I won't be here. I'll be with my parents. But I mean, the podcast will be here because I have great episodes for you both tomorrow and Friday. Actually, a really very, very special conversation I'm going to be sharing with you on Friday's show with Dr. Aaron Carroll, who is one of your all-time favorite guests here on the program, as well as one of my best friends in the world. He had the single worst year of anybody that I know. He lost both his mother and his father, then had a terrible accident where he had a panic attack, fainted, and fell down the side of a hill and had to be medevaced out by a helicopter. And then, yes, it gets worse. His best friend passed away after a several years fight with cancer. And it's just been a horrible year. And the reason I bring it up, and I'm kind of just promoting it or teasing it, is the conversation is because it is a wonderful, vulnerable, amazing, thought-provoking conversation from such a special guy in my life and in many of yours because of what he has offered us on this program over the years and all the different media outlets that he has been on and created himself, including a YouTube channel and a blog and various columns at the New York Times and the Atlantic. So that is going to be Friday. It's just going to be the interview, just Aaron and I think you're really going to like it. So please subscribe and make sure that you know that it drops when it does on Friday. And then tomorrow, great conversation with historian Kenneth C. Davis about Thanksgiving and more. There's some other This Week in History stuff from this past week. Kenneth C. Davis, amazing historian. And I'm scheduled to have a conversation with the legend, the Black Eagle, Joe Madison of SiriusXM Urban View, who is on a hunger strike to get voting rights passed. Scheduled to speak with him as well. So that is what's coming up tomorrow and Friday. And today I've got Barry Ritholtz joining me for about an hour. Only one guest today, the rare one guest show, but schedule just got messed up. Usually two guests, but a great conversation with Barry. And he, of course, is one of your favorites. We talked about jobs, the economy, inflation, and more as always. So Ritholtz is coming up, but right now it's time to recap yesterday's news and what we call the last 24. Here we go. Very consequential stories, court decisions being dropped yesterday. A jury awarded $25 million in damages for the Charlottesville violence in August of 2017. Ahmaud Arbery case is now in the jury's hands after 13 days of testimony. By the time you're hearing this, maybe we'll have a verdict. The federal jury found that drug chains have been responsible for a role in the opioid crisis, and a COVID rebound in the U.S. is as bad as last November in some spots. So plenty to talk about. But let me start by playing for you something thoughtful. I want to get us kicked off in a good way. And this conversation, you may have already seen this because it certainly ripped up Twitter yesterday, and I'm sure TikTok and other social media sites. But this is actor Andrew Garfield, who is on Stephen Colbert's Late Show, and it's one of the most gorgeous outlooks on grief that you may have ever heard, according to Lucy Ford on Twitter. My friend David Campbell also quoted it and said, "This is truly beautiful. Take 3 minutes and watch. It's healing." And I want to play it for you. And I've already heard it a couple times. So if you heard it, it's worth hearing again. Kudos and credit to Colbert for asking the question and Andrew Garfield for giving and for giving him the space to answer it. Here it is.
You yourself have suffered great grief just recently with the loss of your mother. And I'm sorry for your family's loss.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering how doing this show or any show, how art itself helps you deal with grief?
Yeah. I love talking about it, by the way. So if I cry, it's only it's only a beautiful thing. This is all the unexpressed love, right? The grief that will remain with us, until we pass, because we never get enough time with each other, right? No matter if someone lives till 60, 15, or, 99. So I hope this grief stays with me, because it's all the unexpressed love that I didn't get to tell her. And I told her every day. We all told her every day. She was the best of us. So for me, I was able to step into this in a way where I could honor this incredible life of Jonathan Larson. And he was taken far too soon. He died at the age of 35 on the night of the first preview of Rent off Broadway at the New York Theater Workshop. Some strange twist of fate that he was taken that soon. And this film is kind of to do with that. It's to do with this ticking clock that we all have, that we all know in somewhere deep down that life is sacred, life is short, and we better just be here as much as possible with each other, holding on to each other. And for me, I got to sing Jonathan Larson's unfinished song while simultaneously singing for my mother and her unfinished song. And I'm indebted to John, and I'm indebted to Lin-Manuel Miranda. I'm indebted to everyone who's brought me to this place so that I can honor the most beautiful person that I've ever experienced in my life through my art, and use it as a way to heal, use it as a way to sew up the wounds, because that's what we do, right? That's what we do. That's what you do every night. You sew up our wounds. You sew up our wounds. And both John and my mother were artists, and they were warriors for art. They knew the power of art, and they knew the power of leaving the world in a slightly more beautiful state than when they found it. So thank you for letting me talk about her, and thank you for letting me talk about her with my two guys up there as well. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah, that really was wonderful. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I and so many others did as well. Credit to both Colbert and Andrew Garfield. That was just beautiful. All right, now let's head over and into the White House briefing room, where yesterday Peter Doocy, who somehow got a job at the place his dad worked, Steve Doocy, and he is in the White House every day with other reporters, getting to ask questions, always confrontational questions for the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, and she handles it pretty well. Let's start with this one about Joe Biden and his response over the past year to Kyle Rittenhouse and the horrific situation in Wisconsin.
Would the president ever apologize to the acquitted Kenosha shooter Kyle Rittenhouse for suggesting online and on TV that he is a white supremacist?
Well, let's be clear what we're talking about here. This is about a campaign video released last year that used President Trump's own words during a debate as he refused to condemn white supremacists and militia groups. And President Trump, as we know from history, and as many of you covered, didn't just refuse to condemn militia groups on the debate stage. He actively encouraged them throughout his presidency. So, what we've seen are the tragic consequences of that. When people think it's okay to take the law into their own hands instead of allowing law enforcement to do its job. And the president believes in condemning hatred, division, and violence. That's exactly what was done in that video.
But if you're saying that it was just a campaign video, it wasn't. The president also gave an interview where he said this Rittenhouse was part of a militia coming out of Illinois. Have you ever heard this president referring to Trump say one negative thing about white supremacists? These are all things, none of this was proven in the trial. And Kyle Rittenhouse is saying that the president had actual malice in defaming his character. Is that what happened here?
The president spoke to the verdict last week. He has obviously condemned the hatred and division and violence we've seen around the country by groups like the Proud Boys and groups that that individual has posed in photos with. But beyond that, I'll leave it to his comments around the verdict.
Yeah, somehow I didn't think that Joe Biden was going to apologize to Kyle Rittenhouse in that case. Not sure how closely you followed that. But then there was also this question from Peter Doocy. about why on earth the president is taking time off during Thanksgiving and going to Nantucket.
The president said today that he was sent here to look out for these working and middle-class families who are strained right now. So what should they read into him leaving now at this time of great personal financial hardship for so many to go to Nantucket for the week?
Well, first I would say, Peter, that I hope you're spending time with your family. I'm spending time with my family, and I hope everybody in here is spending time with their families. This is a time to put politics aside, spend time with your loved ones, and talk about what you're grateful for. I will also tell you from spending some time working for this president and a past president that you are president no matter where you are.
There you go. Good answer and dumb question. And that is where my wife and daughter met Joe Biden, on Nantucket during Thanksgiving after the election, after Trump won in 2016. We were out there, and my wife basically stalked Joe Biden into a clothing store and met him and introduced Ava to him, and he was really sweet to them. And that was a real weird time because it was just after the 2016 election, but there they were. All right, what else? You might have heard about these smash and grab shoplifting, like group shoplifting incidents that have taken place in California, apparently in Illinois as well. But apparently this is pretty bad stuff. Not good. Don't do this. About 80 looters descended on a Nordstrom the other night, and an employee was pepper sprayed. 2 others were punched and kicked. The robbers were in and out of the store within a minute, and it's just wild. Anyway, here's the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. He's done with this. He doesn't want any more of this.
You will see an increased presence in and around large retail centers and shopping malls all throughout the Bay. So people see a visible presence as a deterrent. These people need to be held to account. We need to investigate these crimes. We need to break up these crime rings. And we need to make an example out of these folks, because the impact they're having is in your question. They're not just stealing people's products and impacting their livelihoods. They're stealing a sense of place and confidence.
All right, Gavin Newsom on the smash and grab shoplifting plots that have been taking place at department stores in California. All right, and here is a basketball player named Enes Kanter. Been following his commentary and criticism of China's human rights violations and other athletes in the NBA who are silent about them. This is an interesting and controversial and very outspoken guy, and I've really grown to admire him, although I really am just learning about who he is. Anyway, here he is on CNN with John Berman yesterday.
It is a fight, but it is a good fight, and people do get uncomfortable, but someone had to do it. You know, you see so many actors like, John Cena, so many athletes, or, so many singers and rappers are scared to say a word because they care too much about their deals are going on or business going on with China. To me, human rights and people's, basic rights is way more important than any deal you can offer me.
Okay, Enes Kanter is his name, and go Celtics. I think I'm going to start watching basketball and root for the Boston Celtics, where he currently plays, and learn more about him. I guess there's a documentary that featured him and his activism as well on ESPN. I'm going to look into all of it, and if you're paying attention to that, if I'm missing something, let me know. All right, well, there's no through line on today's Last 24 in terms of these clips. Often there is different chunks, but these are a bunch of random clips that I wanted to play for you today. And let's move on to the next one, which is another day, another list of subpoenas from January 6th investigators. They now subpoenaed the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and more as the probe is turning to domestic terrorism. Here is CNN's Ryan Nobles with the report.
This is the second day in a row that the January 6th Select Committee has issued subpoenas to a group of individuals hoping to learn more about what happened on January 6th. And this is an interesting batch of requests that they put out today. It focuses on these right-wing extremist groups that were very prominent during the riots and chaos on January 6th. Among them, the Proud Boys International. This is a subpoena of the entire organization, as well as their former chairman, Henry Enrique Tarrio. Tarrio was in and around Washington, D.C. in the week leading up to January 6th, was very vocal in his opposition to the election results, and among the groups, among the people, I should say, that were encouraging encouraging people to try and do whatever they could to interrupt the certification of the election results on January 6th. Also, the committee wants to hear from the Oath Keepers. This is another sort of paramilitary militia group, and its president, Elmer Stewart Rhodes. Oath Keepers had big numbers. A lot of their members were here on January 6th and were involved. Some actually got into the Capitol on that day, and there are some that have been subject to prosecution by the Justice Department as a result.
Okay, there you go with that. Big news yesterday. And now this. President Biden yesterday remarked about the rising cost of goods and gas this Thanksgiving, argued in an optimistic tone that the economy is ready for the holiday rush. The president said that high gas prices are a problem in the U.S. and globally, but he touted the release of the Department of Energy 50 million barrels of oil from the nation's Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is a controversial move. The White House announced that, though, earlier on Tuesday. And, well, here he is talking about the big retailers that he met and feels pretty comfortable with the holiday shopping season as a result of the commitments they made to him.
We also met with the CEOs of Walmart, Target, Home Depot, TJ Maxx, and others. Those retailers, large retailers, and others agreed to move products more quickly, stock the shelves more quickly. And by the way, you may have heard the CEO of Walmart yesterday on the steps we've taken. He said, and I quote, "The combination of private enterprise and government working together has been really successful." He went on to say, all the way through the supply chain, there's a lot of innovation.
And speaking of raising prices, the dollar store is now a $1.25 store. I don't know why I picked a Fox News business clip, but that's where I saw it on social media. So here is the anchor there explaining it.
Dollar Tree, actually, they've hit a new high, I think,
yes.
The story. So
remember they experimented with charging $1.25 for some goods? Well, it worked. Customers didn't shy away. So they're going to be $1.25 tree forever. They said, look, we sold goods for $1 for 35 years, and now we're changing it. We're changing because the times are changing.
My first reaction to that was how some really upset customers are going to be giving a hard time to the minimum wage clerk at the dollar store. Just start complaining. I can't believe you raised your prices. And just some adolescent kid voice cracks. I didn't have anything to do with the prices. Okay, I'm still making $7.25. They didn't even give me another quarter. Please leave me alone. Things are not going well. Anyway, you got to hear this. This is Brian Kilmeade. He's one of the anchors on the Fox and Friends, their morning show, and he also hosts a radio show. And he had his colleague, Brett Baer, who's from the, quote, straight news site on it. It got real awkward.
You know, I watched the feature with Tucker, and I watched it on Fox Nation. Interesting perspective I didn't get before, but I didn't get hurt by it. I didn't get damaged by it. Were you bothered by it? Because that's the reporting.
Uh-oh. Long pause.
There's, yeah, Brian, I don't want to go down this road. And okay. You know, I mean, there were concerns about it, definitely. And I think that the news division did what we do. I mean, we covered the story. And, you know, I wanted to do all of that internally. Steve and Jonah made their decision, and it's their decision.
Oh, gotta hand it to him. That was radio gold on that moment. Brian Kilmeade asking a fair question, and Brett Baer not wanting to answer that question at all and wanting to keep his job at Fox News and continue to spread horse shit every day. What do you do? Oh, I spread horse shit all the time. Oh, great. That sounds like a job with a lot of integrity. Oh, and how about this happening in New York City?
The statue of Thomas Jefferson has been removed from City Hall. Workers took down the statue from the council chambers where it had stood for more than a century. The city's design commission voted unanimously to move it to the New York Historical Society on the Upper West Side. The request for the statue's removal came after complaints it honored a slave owner.
New York One News with the report there. But yeah, the Thomas Jefferson statue is gone. Complex history, primary author of the Declaration of Independence, of course, also a man who enslaved more than 600 human beings and fathered several children with one of them, Sally Hemings. And so it was a unanimous vote, and down goes Jefferson. Anybody shedding a tear for this? Anybody think this is wrong? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. As always, standupwithpete@gmail.com. And here is Pete Buttigieg yesterday touting the electrical vehicle charging network and why it matters for both folks that live in urban areas and in rural areas.
Yeah, we're very excited to begin work on the EV charging network that the president envisions, 500,000 chargers across the country, to make sure that in big, wide open spaces out west that you know that you can get a charge where you need one on a long trip, and in urban areas that are underserved, where people don't live in detached houses where you can just plug the car into your wall of your garage, that they have equitable access to. In fact, if you think about it, the two kinds of drivers who stand to benefit the most from electric vehicles are rural drivers who drive those long distances and burn a lot of gas.
All right, good points from the Transportation Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, just a day before a whole lot of cars get on the road and probably already are. Maybe you're listening to me on the way to your Thanksgiving destination, and I thank you for it. Great to be along for the ride with you and your family, if your family's there. Otherwise, just with you. I'm happy to be with you is all I'm trying to say. Hi, Susie. Okay, so let's move on to where we started. That's where we will finish with Stephen Colbert and CBS Late Show.
Big news on Friday was that after being accused of crossing state lines, killing 2 people, and wounding another last year during a Black Lives Matter protest, Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted on all counts. Okay. Yeah, okay, cards on the table. I'm not a legal expert, so I can't tell you whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse broke the law. But I can tell you this. If he didn't break the law, we should change the law.
All right, there you go, Colbert with a good point on the Late Show on CBS. All right, well, that's your last 24, but I've got a lot more headlines for you, rapid-fire style, coming at you in a news dump right now.
What's the score there at the door? Last 24 news dump.
Yeah, voiceover announcer Pete Coe is off for a couple days, so I went back to the archives and grabbed one of the originals, one of the OG news dump jingles from John Carroll. An old submission. Thank you, John. Always good. All right, what have I got for you? Let me start by mentioning that Samsung, the technology manufacturer, set to build a $17 billion chip factory in Taylor, Texas, according to the Wall Street Journal. An official announcement could come as early as yesterday. People familiar with the matter told the Wall Street Journal comes as the Biden administration makes a push for expanding semiconductor production in the U.S. So that's pretty interesting. See what happens and follow up there. But it's supposed to create 1,800 jobs. Chip production not expected to start until 2024. More than a dozen families of victims of the 2018 Parkland, Florida shooting have reached a settlement with the Department of Justice. CNN first reporting the settlement is part of a lawsuit filed after the FBI failed to act on tips regarding the shooter, whose name I will not say. The former Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School student killed 17 people. According to court documents obtained by CNN, parties involved in the settlement are, quote, presently working to finalize additional details before submission for the final approval by the appropriate Department of Justice official, and that once those details are finalized and approval is granted, they will ask that court to dismiss these actions in their entirety. So, an interesting story to follow what's going on with the Parkland shooting victims. Settlement comes 1 month after the families of the Parkland shooting victims reached a $25 million settlement with the Broward County School District. And last month, by the way, the shooter pleaded guilty to all charges against him related to the shooting. Never-ending nightmare for that community and their families. Dr. Barry Hummel down there, always thinking of you every time I read about it. That's where he lives. More than 20 people apparently got ill after eating oysters. Oh, dear. Guess why? There was poop in them. Between more than 20 people in Maryland apparently fell ill after Maryland officials failed to warn residents about oysters that were contaminated by raw sewage. Between October 28th and 30th, heavy rain sent 25,000 gallons of sewage in the Potomac River, contaminated oysters in the water, according to the Baltimore Sun. Man, these oysters taste like shit. And I mentioned the story at the top, but again, to elaborate just a little bit, more than a dozen of the nation's most prominent white supremacists and hate groups conspired to intimidate, harass, or commit acts of violence during 2017's deadly, quote, Unite the Right rally. according to a jury that also decided the men and their racist organizations should pay $26 million in damages. The 11 jurors couldn't come to an agreement on 2 federal conspiracy claims, but they found that every defendant, including former alt-right leader Richard Spencer, rally organizer Jason Kessler, and Christopher Cantwell, dubbed the crying Nazi after sharing a video of himself weeping, were all liable under Virginia law. Very important precedent being set by that judgment out of Virginia. The Grammy nominations are out, and Jon Batiste has the most music nominations. He, of course, is the band leader on Colbert. That guy's on top of the world. He earned Album of the Year, and well, there's, I don't know, I'm not going to read all of these off, but I don't really even care about the Grammys. I'm not sure why I mentioned that, other than the fact that Louis C.K. apparently got nominated for Best Comedy Album, which is pretty wild, seeing as the allegations against him and the controversy surrounding him. But also Louis Black, Nate Bargatze, Kevin Hart, Chelsea Handler, and Lavelle Crawford. Other comedians on that list, all of which I know. And really interesting list there. But you probably care more about the music, which I don't know. And I'm just going to keep talking. Moving on to the next story. 5 current and former Georgia police officers were indicted Monday on murder charges related to the 2019 death of a man in police custody outside the Atlanta Motor Speedway. Arrest warrants were issued for Henry County Police Department officers and former Hampton Police Department officers, according to CNN. A grand jury charged them each with 1 count of malice murder, 2 counts of felony murder, and 1 count of aggravated assault in violation of oath of office. The incident started after a passerby called 911 to report a naked man outside a concert being held at a speedway. Read about it all at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Interesting and important story coming out of Atlanta. Not every day that we see law enforcement agents being brought to justice, but when it is, I certainly want to mention it and talk about it and acknowledge it. And how about this? The Justice Department filed a lawsuit on Tuesday seeking to block a major U.S. sugar manufacturer from acquiring its rival, arguing that allowing the deal would harm competition and consumers. The suit was filed in federal court in Delaware. It comes about 8 months after the U.S. Sugar announced it reached an agreement to acquire the Imperial Sugar Company, one of the largest sugar refiners in the nation. And so that's an important story, and that's what we have government for in the Justice Department. I haven't read much into that, but it sounds like a good move. They said the merger would eliminate aggressive competition in the supply of refined sugar that leads to lower prices, better quality, and more reliable service. Sugar's really bad for you, also. Just worth mentioning that. The Case Against Sugar by Gary Taubes was a game changer for me. Great and certainly important and relevant book. All right, well, that is today's news dump for you, and I hope that you learned as much as I did looking up and reading about those stories. Look into any of them deeper if you want, and tell people that this is where you get the most robust news recap daily of any podcast you can find. Completely edited, produced, and hosted by yours truly. So thank you, and thank you for subscribing, and also thank you to Tommy John, who I'm very excited to be talking about right now, because I've been hearing about this company advertised on radio shows and podcasts for years, and I was always like, what's the deal? Are they really any good? Yeah, they're game changing, folks. This Black Friday, celebrate softness season by stocking up on your favorite Tommy John underwear, loungewear, and pajamas. When you start your day wearing Tommy John, as I did for the first time ever, it's completely different. I can't even believe I haven't been wearing these underwear for years. I've been wearing these grimy underwear that I just keep buying cheap at discount stores, and now I finally got what I deserve, Tommy John. And you start your day wearing Tommy John, you're more comfortable. You can do everything better. The podcast is even better now that I'm wearing Tommy John. Is that possible? Shop their Black Friday sale right now, folks. Give the gift of comfort to everybody on your list, including yourself, with Tommy John's men's and women's loungewear. With over 16 million pairs sold, giving the gift of Tommy John underwear and loungewear has become a holiday tradition for families across the country. 98% of women and men love getting a gift from Tommy John. That's why Tommy John doesn't have customers, they have fanatics, and now I am one of them. Loving this. It's all backed up by their Tommy John's best pair you'll ever wear or it's free guarantee. So, during Tommy John's Black Friday sale, get 25% off site-wide plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/standup. That's right, you can get the best underwear money can buy and support your favorite podcast at the same time. Get 20% off plus free shipping for a limited time only at TommyJohn.com/standup. Go right now to TommyJohn.com/standup. Tommy John underwear feels so good, so free, so barely there. It's like going commando without all the risk. And you know there's a lot of risk, especially if you work out of a shed. All right, there, we did it. Go check it out. And now it's time to get to my first and only guest of today, one of your all-time favorites, one of the Mount Rushmore faces on the Mount Rushmore of stand-up. What am I trying to say? He's just one of your favorites. Everybody loves Barry Ritholtz. Ritholtz.com is the blog, the website, the big picture, his book, Bailout Nation, his podcast, his Masters in Business on the Bloomberg Network. Of course, Barry has his own wealth management firm, Ritholtz Wealth Management, and you can find him traveling in normal times and speaking and moderating panels all over the country. And yet we get to talk to him right here on Stand Up pretty much whenever we want because he's a really good friend of mine and love talking with him today about jobs, economy, inflation, work-life balance. Stay for the end of the show when he asks me, he puts out a hypothetical saying, if SiriusXM called you and hired you back, what would you, and he laid out details. And I actually am very proud of the answer that I gave him. I'd love for you to stay for the whole interview and listen to it. So check out Barry on Twitter at Ritholtz. Tell him you heard him here. And here we go.
Mic out. But the Larry Sanders theme song should be your intro music.
Oh, I can't use that.
I know that.
That was the whole thing you were doing? Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
All right, here we go. And he hung up. And he's gone. And he's gone.
Reboot. Let's start all over.
Hilarious.
I don't know what just happened there.
All right. He disappeared.
I see a red. Can I tell you something? This is where you know your OCD is not completely under control. I see a red X and I want to click it. I'm like, oh, a red X popped up. Let me click that. and the way the window, the way the browser window on my screen was, I just see a red X. The lettering below that red X says Leave Studio.
That's
but
right.
It was below the bottom of the. I see a red X and I want to click it with my mouse. It's something the Rolling Stones sang in the 60s.
Right out of our conversation. You were there and I go, let's start. Here we go. And then you just disappeared. You just ejected. It was really jarring and hurtful.
I don't want to see that because it's like all
That's
the other
funny.
options are black and then this red one is please click me.
All right, well, I've got a lot to talk with you about in terms of jobs, the inflation, the economy, all of which you've been writing about on the blog. And this is an interesting time to be an expert in the things that you are. And I'm so happy to have you joining me. Do you like this time of year, by the way? It's Thanksgiving week. It's autumn. Are you in good spirits? How are you feeling?
Well, it's weird because last year we couldn't do our usual Thanksgiving routine. There was no gathering with family. There was no traveling. You know, it's fascinating that we're recording this around 4, and since we changed the clocks, this is the beginning of sunset, which is really coming up on December 21st, the shortest day of the year.
Yep.
And so it's literally a month away. And so I'm looking at my windows, the trees that are left with leaves, some red, some yellow, some oranges, and they're just all backlit by the sunset. It's spectacular. It's hard to look out the window and not be in a reasonable, decent spirit, especially after a day where it kind of just was gray and rainy all day.
You know what all of what you just described means to someone like me? Ski season just around the corner. Time to get in shape.
Yeah.
Time to get in skiing shape at 46 years old. That requires a lot of work for me. So,
have you bumped into people your own age, like people you know from college, and do you kind of say, wow, these folks look terrible? I don't look that bad.
No, unfortunately, most of the guys that I grew up with have stayed very active, especially my core group of friends who, like I said, skiing is... We all grew up on outdoor activity, and none of us ever really quit. I was the only one who became a city slicker, really.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I had a conversation over the weekend with a buddy from college who was like a young, good-looking stud in college, and he's got like this long COVID beard, and it's completely turned gray, and his hair has gone gray. And I want to say, we're not the same age, are we? And he goes, no, you're a couple of years older than me. I'm like, oh. And I want to say, you better go see a doctor. You need to have that shit taken care of.
Did you spend your pandemic studying wizardry? What the hell happened to you? Are you going to cast a spell on me, Gandalf?
Right, it's funny. And I have a decent amount of gray, but not like solid gray for my age. So I bump into people, and it's like every now and then my wife and I play guess how old that couple in the restaurant is.
That's fun.
And it's always horrifying when they're like, wait, that couple is younger than us? We're not older than those old farts.
Yeah, it's an interesting time of life right now to feel like you're becoming old. You're starting to look around, and that's
well, you're always becoming old. You have to recognize that's your path from the day you're born.
Sure, but
and as I'm fond of telling people, it's much better than the alternative. So,
well, the point you're making more specifically is you see people your age, and you look at them, and you're like, I'm not that old, am I? And the truth is, you're not necessarily. Depending on your genetics and how well you've taken care of yourself, you can do a lot more things than maybe the other guy can. And I can still ski, and I plan to be able to ski the rest of my life. So time to get in shape, sir.
I'm fond of telling people it's not the years, it's the miles.
Right? I like that. I like that. Speaking of which, I don't know how I was going to segue into our main subject matter there.
Let's go. Segue away.
Well, you have been writing a lot lately about jobs, economy, and inflation. And let's just start with the larger subject, which is, I think, the whole economy. And we've been hearing this phrase, the Great Resignation. And I just interviewed Derek Thompson, who wrote that great piece in The Atlantic about it. So many other people are as well. But basically, you don't really like that phrase. You've been covering this for a long time, talking about the future of the economy. And now, because of COVID, everybody says, well, it's happening a lot faster. And you've been watching it and predicting it. So what's wrong with the Great Resignation phrase?
So a couple of things. First, anytime you take a complicated part of the world, an economically complex, intricate, lots of moving pieces, and not just a uniform pool, but, top decile, bottom quartile, all these different things. There's not one labor market. There's many labor markets here in the U.S. And so when you have like a simple narrative, the Great Resignation, well, it's not very accurate. It's a great storyline, but the real life is it's not especially accurate. So the world is more complicated than that. So what's going on? You have a bunch of things. On the one hand, the labor pool has not recovered. Right? We're still 5 million jobs short from the pre-pandemic era. And I
heard the figure of 80%. We're 80% to where we were before.
Right. And part of the reason for that, for sure, is there are people who have not gone back to work. That's part of it. But there's lots of other moving parts. First, the number of immigrants coming into the country is a fraction of what it was in 2016. That's a huge shift. That's 2 million people who normally would be taking entry-level jobs that Americans don't want to do. So that's a factor. You have a lot of early retirement driven in part by changes in the economy, but also driven by people whose portfolios and houses and other assets are worth so much more today than they were 5 years ago.
Right.
And then you have childcare issues and, the challenge we've seen on the side of female workers who can't get childcare, or they go to work and the work pays childcare labor. Why bother? Wait, I have to work, pay taxes, and what's left I pay the woman or the person who watches my kid? That's pointless. So I'd rather raise my own kid. So that's another factor. But the most fascinating part, and I've been writing about this now for about 8 months. I talked about the shifting balance in the balance of power in the labor market.
Right.
And I talked about Elvis, your waiter, has left the building. Stop and think about this for a second. For 18 months, we basically subsidized people staying at home. We sent checks to them. We gave them extended unemployment benefits. And while the sort of 70s era meme Did they have memes in 1970s?
Well, they had memes. They just didn't. They weren't exactly.
They didn't have social media to share it. But the idea of the welfare queen driving the Cadillac with 9 kids and not working and suckling at the teat of the government. There are people who believe that. And
sure.
We had this fantastic real life experiment. Literally 25 states cut the unemployment benefits early, and 25 states let it go and let it go till it ran its natural course. And the experiment was, well, if people are really staying home just to, live off of unemployment, then those states should see a big uptick in their employment rate. And actually, they were effectively identical. Specifically, the states that ran unemployment to the end, their employment rates were actually a little better than the ones that didn't.
Right.
So that meme turned out to be nonsense. My thesis, which is proven, and I talked about, again, 6 months ago.
You by the way, you minimize a really negative and pernicious narrative by calling it a meme. I mean, that was a theory. It's a long-held theory.
Oh, no, that was endorsed by Ronald Reagan and a lot of the far right and center right. It wasn't even far right.
Liberals think that about people, that people are lazy and don't want to work, that poor people are. Go ahead.
So
Sorry.
here's my theory. So I'm looking at data, and this data led me to the following theory. First, we see a record high quits rate. More people with jobs are saying, I quit than ever before. So when you do that, you don't qualify for unemployment. So obviously something else is going on. Simultaneously, we have record high new business formation. By the way, I love writing these things 6 months ago, and then eventually the rest of the world of economics catches up. It's
that's why people like you.
It's one of my favorite things is to spot these things before everybody else does them.
You're not even humble bragging. You're just straight up bragging, which is why I like you. But
it's not. I'm not saying this for braggadocio. If I can tease out these little things and figure out things before everybody else sees it, I love that. It's a
I understand
puzzle.
why. I understand what you're saying. But
I don't
at the
mean
same
to
point, it brings you credibility.
Bragging. I mean to say, the world is this giant puzzle. If I could figure out what piece goes where before other people do.
Back to the point.
All right, so it's not the great resignation. Over the past 18 months, all these folks who have been at home, getting paid to not do nothing, but they said, I don't want to go back to my dead-end job in a non-career, in an industry that's not doing well. I don't want to go back to retail or restaurants or entry-level nursing or all that. So all these folks...
Or I don't want to simply commute. I don't want to do that commute. I don't want to wake up early and put on those clothes.
Discussion. There's a whole other discussion about commute. I want to stick with 18 months. What these people have done is they said, I want a part of the American dream. So they've gotten new skills and certifications. Some of them got online degrees. They upskilled. They launched businesses. They started to create apps. They started to create small entrepreneurships and all these things. This isn't the great resignation. This is the great disruption.
Right.
Because you now have millions of people who said, hey, I could do this. I could sell stuff on Etsy. I could work with Shopify to sell retail stuff. I could start a business. I don't need to commute into an office 9 to 5. That is pointless. I've been going into the office once or twice a week. My train schedule hasn't quite gotten back to normal. It's still a little challenging. It's not, I used to have a lot of choices and it was quicker. And basically you become very painfully aware of how completely inefficient commuting is. Yes, if you're gonna work together, if you're gonna do something creative where you have to collaborate with some other people, being in one place is great. But to just go in the office to sit in the office is just a giant waste of time. And people have figured that out. So the commute is part of it, but the bigger picture is not just the commute, but it's the ability to control your own life, your own destiny, to take charge of your work product, your hours, your general life. I think that's much more significant and then just people take this job and shove it.
Right.
It's not that.
And you write in this piece at Ritholtz.com, the big picture, if this trend continues, it would be a significant break from the power dynamics of the 3 decades prior to the global financial crisis. So that's before 2008, 3 decades before that. This has deep ramifications for the economy. What are they? Companies whose business model is relying on cheap labor are running into problems. Oh, wow. You write about then a bunch of the ramifications here. Do you?
So the thing I posted, so I'm working on a longer piece about inflation, and we could talk about inflation.
Yeah, that's next.
That'll go up tomorrow. But in the process, every now and then you find some really interesting things that don't quite fit into what you're writing about. So I just threw a couple of charts up on the site today that basically talk about real wages. Listen to this insane data point. Right? Real wages, meaning the median wage we pay people across the whole American economy, adjusted for inflation, had the same buying power at the end of 2014 that it did in 1979. 35 years, workers' real buying power, their after inflation wages, were unchanged. Gee, I can't figure out why people are pissed. By the way, even worse, if you look at just minimum wage, that was unchanged from 2015 all the way back to 1949. Think about how insane that is.
Does wage in that usage reference salaries in general? Because we're talking about wage stagnation across several. How many years did you say? And what range of income?
So that's the average of all income in the U.S. So the median income is essentially unchanged after inflation from 79 to 2015. The minimum wage is unchanged from 49 to 2015. That's just bonkers. And
what does that say about the health of an economy or any kind of equity of wealth in an economy? We're never going to get to some place where we're all the same. But I mean, like, how do you? That is such an egregious disparity. I just want to just spend one moment on your judgment of what that means for a society.
Sure. So I think economists are looking at this backwards. I think they're looking at it and saying, "Oh my, look how inflationary wages are," and that really misses the bigger picture, no pun intended. If you zoom out and look at the 30,000-foot view, low-end wages, right, partly anchored at that level due to the failure of the federal government to raise the minimum wage, not only have they been subsidizing these bad business models, they have been net deflationary, meaning the bottom portion of the wage pool helped keep prices down because we paid people at poverty levels. And what's going on now, so less immigration. Oh, I left out 40% of COVID deaths in America were working people. So those people have left the labor force. Noah Smith did this really interesting chart on where immigration should have been if it wasn't stopped by the last administration in 2016. Those are millions of people who would be filling literally half of the open jobs. Go through all the problems, and what's going on now is the dynamics of the past couple of years has shifted that balance of power, and so we end up with a giant reset. This isn't going to be I don't believe this will be a persistent source of inflation for the next 10 years, not a structural source of inflation. I think this is a giant catch-up, and it's going to stay at this level and then go back to a semi-normal rate of inflation. Figure 2%, 3% wage gains, but you're not going to see these giant. The minimum wage is $7.25. Stop and think about how laughable that is.
The federal minimum wage.
Federal minimum wage, right? That's $15,000 a year for a full-time job. I don't care where you live; it's a joke.
Of course, states setting their own minimum wage. I've never looked
higher, sure, especially on the coast.
I've never looked at any research or studies as to how that creates any kind of migration. If you can't, it's
a chicken and egg problem. Because you need the economy to support it, and historically, raising the minimum wage is good for the local economy because, crazy as this sounds, if you pay people on the lowest end of the wage scale more money, they go out and frivolously piss it away on things like food and rent and medicine and, clothes for their kids. And all that money just circulates in the economy, and it just boosts the economy. It is, as opposed to, I own a McDonald's, right? And I'm going to make $500,000 in profit this year. Now, I could either take that money, but I own a dozen other McDonald's. I'm going to take that money. I'm going to stick it in the bank. I'm going to put it in the stock market. It's not going to find its way back into the economy. But if you say you're going to make a little less profits because we're going to mandate the minimum wage go higher, and let me remind everybody, the reason I'm picking on McDonald's is they had a McHelp line for workers. They were paying so little, they qualified for SNAP, which is food stamps for kids, and aid to dependent families with children, and welfare. And so the taxpayers were subsidizing the labor of these employees of for-profit private companies. The fix was really easy. Raise the minimum wage and stop having taxpayers subsidize the Diabetes Express of fast food workers. I'm not going to tell people eat McDonald's, don't eat McDonald's, but I am going to say, don't ask me as a taxpayer to subsidize your employees. Sure. You have to pay them a rational minimum wage, and the federal minimum wage of $7.25 is a joke. And if your shitty hamburgers have to cost 50 cents more, it'll save money for Medicare. A couple of decades from now, it'll be that much less people's legs will be amputating due to diabetes. And that'll be the end of my McDonald's rant. So,
well, that takes us to...
And Walmart, by the way, not a lot of better. P.S. The smart companies, Amazon, Starbucks, BJ's, there were a bunch of companies, Target, that figured out, hey, if we raise our minimum wage to $12 or $15, we could scoop up all the best people, and we'll leave the dollar store and Walmart to pick up whoever's left, and we'll have a strategic advantage in the competitive marketplace. And that's what happened. It wasn't the government that raised minimum wages. It was Amazon that drove this, and Starbucks and others. And so you've had this giant catch-up. Instead of this being like a gradual cost of living adjustment every year, the minimum wage should probably be somewhere around $12 or $13, depending on what you want to look at. Productivity or inflation or corporate profits or whatever. It should probably be higher. $20 everywhere in the country, probably not right. You have to have something relative to the local economy. But $12 is a no-brainer, and a path to $15 with cost of living adjustments, that makes a lot of sense.
So do we go from jobs to inflation or the economy? I think inflation is next.
Sure. Let's talk about inflation. And, I want to reset the transitory discussion because
you always do.
I wrote something that said how we experience time, inflation edition. And I may have sent that to you. So
what do you think CPI will be in a year?
I don't know.
Is that the
that's the title? Yeah, that's one. Yeah, so I asked Twitter where do you think inflation is going to be sometime, and you get this really interesting set of answers, which is kind of fascinating because people think, it'll be over 6%, and I'm like, you understand that we're looking at this year over year. So last year inflation was pretty low, and we've seen a big uptick. It began in March, April, but it really accelerated late in the summer, and so the trailing 12 months, looking back 12 months. Was a big uptick. And there's a concept called the base rate effect. So if something costs you X when it's $100 and it goes up to $120, wow, that's a 20% gain. But now you're starting at $120. Is it going to go up 22 to maintain that? That's a giant. To maintain that is really, really big. Lots of what we're dealing is not part of the normal economy. It's due to things like, so let me reset this. I called this transitory because I expect this to last a certain period of time and then go back to normal. And a certain period of time is, a couple of weeks, a couple of quarters, maybe a year. But that's not how humans experience time. The way we experience time is we form an idea. So the example I use, we form an idea on inflation, and hey, all this is related to reopening and supply chain and semiconductors making automobile prices higher. And we figure this will resolve itself in 6 months to a year. So we understand this concept. But then, the next day there's more data and we start talking about inflation, and then the next day, and then the next day, and then the next, and every day there's a fire hose of this noise. And people just don't have the ability to say, well, you're living in the here and now, in the moment by moment, but that's not how economic data comes out. Some of this data is quarterly. Some of this data is monthly. We need like 6 to 12 months to see if this is truly transitory. But humans can't do that. The fire hose of bullshit every day is an enormous distraction, and it really prevents them from looking at this in a way that I think is...
Well, humans can't do that. Are we talking about investors? Are we talking about investors? Are we talking about consumers? Are we talking about
everybody?
Executives?
Citizens. Right, citizens. And so I want to move away from the word transitory, because people have proven they can't figure out what that means, and move to the word structural. Are these changes in the economy structural? Or if they're not structural, that means, he said cleverly, it's transitory, and those transitory things will go away. So when we look at things like shelter, like homes and rental units, when we look at wages, when we look at automobiles and supply chains, are these structural changes that are going to persist for a long time, or are they going to pass fairly quickly? I think they're not structural, and therefore they're transitory. But since people can't wrap their head around transitory because they don't know how to mute the television, I have to change the frame. And the framework that gets people thinking about this in a better context is, are these structural changes to the economy that are going to persist year after year for a decade or longer? Like when the oil embargo in 1973 happened, that started off a massive, and the rise of OPEC started off a change in energy prices that lasted decades. That is a structural change in the economy. Now, the flip side of it is the underlying trend has been for everything we do to get more efficient, for energy to become a decreasing part of the family budget, for the U.S. economy to be less energy intensive, to move from heavy manufacturing to service economy. So the first move was a couple of decades of energy increases, and that's clearly structural. That was offset by the other side of it, reduced energy intensity. And so that's what structural means. Look at the price of gasoline or energy generally. We're still below price levels of the mid-2000s for gasoline and energy. Yeah, it's up 50% over the past year or two, but that brings us back to 2015 prices. We're still below where we were in 07, 08, 09, which tells me that structurally we're still in a lower price environment for energy.
But you also talk about, that's energy, but you also talk about housing, you talk about technology, and I suppose we could talk about...
technology has been deflationary for our whole lifetime.
Yeah, it gets cheaper and cheaper.
Part of the reason the 70s era economists who have PTSD over inflation, I think part of the reason they're wrong is their expertise is about a world that doesn't exist anymore. This isn't the 1970s. I'm shocked with unemployment at like 4%. People were talking about stagflation. It's like, you clearly don't know what that word means. And I went through like a dozen charts. Here's what the 70s were like. Here's what the 20s, 2020s and 2010s are like. You clearly are just oblivious when it comes to stagflation. And you end up with a situation where experts in a world that doesn't exist are missing what's in front of their face. To wit, the dominant force, the dominant inflation over the past 30 years has been deflation. Think about just about any sort of thing that you're buying from a technological standpoint. Your internet access, your televisions, your computers, your phone. Just think about any toy you buy that has a computer component in it. Your clothes, or most of the things we have been purchasing over the past 20, 30 years have been going down in price. Education has been going up. Healthcare has been going up. Home prices are about even with inflation over time. But those two things, healthcare and education, have been way higher than inflation. Just about everything else you buy has been cheaper. Food costs less. Clothing costs less. Entertainment costs less. Wherever you look, right? Think about how much you get for $7.99 for Netflix a month or Disney Plus or whatever. That's just like if I would have gone back to you in the days of Blockbuster and say, hey, you're coming in and paying $10 in late fees for those 2 videos you're dropping off.
Right. It's a good point.
How about if for $8 I give you 10 million movies and 1,000 new shows and 100 stand-up routine? It's mind-boggling, but nobody stops and thinks about these things.
Oh, God.
That's just one example.
Yeah, no, it's and you think about how much time you spent at the video store looking at first the cassettes and then the DVDs.
And they're out. You finally pick one and they don't have it in stock.
Not behind
we're out of stock of that. I'm going to burn this place down. When this place burns to the ground, send the fire investigator to me because I'm the guy who did it. So I basically gave up on Blockbuster. And if I was smart, I would have figured out, oh, you should bet on them going out of business.
Same with pornography along the same lines, though. I mean, like if you wanted to make this point that you're making about access to so many things that are billion-dollar industries that you don't even have to leave your house for anymore, spending money on your commute, the time lost, all that. You just point and click and get whatever you want.
Now I know why you built a shed with the
jerk shed.
Your shed, without any windows. It's all.
The shed has windows, but they have blinds.
I see that. That is not a coincidence.
I'm just being a thoughtful.
You're just being real.
I'm being a thoughtful father.
You look a little bit like a fiddler crab, and now I understand why.
I
could be so serious, and then the dam breaks, and I just have to.
If you have teenage daughters and you're going to masturbate, they better not be home. Or if you're going to do it, the doors are locked. There's no windows. Everything is opaque. That's why the shed.
Go to the vault.
So, all right. So let's get back to economics then. Now that we're done talking about masturbating in a shed.
Digression over.
So
by the way, let me just point out that you brought it up, not me.
I said porn.
I see the windows behind you are fogged. Nobody can see through them.
Well, you should see the windows in front of me because they can look out on the garden. And they are a game changer. Back to all of your points, meaning I can host a podcast and I can have my own show, distribute it on a wide network and not have to leave this shed. That is kind of one of my paradigm as to describing what you're talking about in terms of this is a long time coming. But it still, might sound to some skeptical people like you're putting a positive spin on the consumer price index and what we're seeing, the cost.
I'm trying to provide context. I'm not trying to spin it. It's like if you just look at if you just look at a pandemic reopening, so you have a couple of other factors we haven't talked about. First, you have the highest amount of savings that we've seen in quite a while in the average American household. And you have the lowest outstanding credit card debt that we've seen because of the CARES Act checks and the extended unemployment benefits. The average family is pretty flush. And so when we look at the overall economy, and once people, I left out a couple of other things. I'll mention one other thing. There has been a slow shift away from physical goods and towards services, right? Which stopped during the pandemic, meaning you didn't go to the gym, you bought a Peloton or some exercise equipment.
Right.
You didn't go to the movies, you bought a big screen TV. You didn't go on vacation, you bought a Winnebago or a car, an SUV, and took the family on a drive. The shift from services to physical goods was substantial. And that's the other chart I showed today, which was, specifically on real wages. Oh, no, that's tomorrow's chart. It really shows you that services have increased in cost about 3%, which is what they were pre-pandemic. Goods have gone up over 8%, almost 9%. They were flat to negative pre-pandemic. So you went from goods that were deflationary to goods driving inflation, and services are the same, which all comes back to, is this transitory or is this structural?
Right.
I think it's not structural because all these things are related to reopening and supply shortages and semiconductor problems and supply chains and all that crap. That'll work itself out eventually. I can't tell you it will take 9 months, 6 months, 3 months, whatever, but it's not going to be here year after year for a decade. That's the difference between structural and transitory.
Right. Well, finally, on the supply chain issues, I mean, we've touched on that, but you're talking about time frames, and I'm not sure if it is different things for different industries, or we're talking about everything that comes from outside of our border or even in our borders.
Right.
But,
huge shortage of truck drivers today.
Yeah, I keep hearing about that, and I keep seeing signs everywhere for this. And you mentioned this, and a listener, I've got to remember who wrote about this, said you had something wrong. I think it was when you were talking about young people don't want to drive trucks. But anyway.
No, why would a young person want to buy a truck, drive a truck? And riddle me that, Batman. Why would a young person want to become a truck driver? Some point in our future, they are going to be driving themselves, right? I can't tell you if it's 50 years or 25 years or, next Tuesday, but I think we all agree trucks are going to essentially be self-driving at a certain point.
Well,
yeah, I had something in my reading list on Sunday that I'm going to share with you. I'm a 20-year truck driver, meaning he's been a truck driver for 20 years, not that he's a 20-year-old. I will tell you why America's shipping crisis will not end. And he's tells people that this is all a whatchamacallit. This is all a function of the ports and just-in-time supply chains and not having enough staff and not having, not building a robust supply chain. I've said this before, just-in-time inventory is catnip to retailers and to logistics companies. And while that's good for profits during normal times, it's bad if there's any sort of
just-in-time inventory,
say, like
which is
a pandemic.
A process by which you keep just what you need on the shelves because it costs more. You make more if you do it that way. But
well, you're not borrowing money to stack up supplies. They arrive as you need them, theoretically.
That's all well and good until you have a crisis like the one we're in.
Right. That's exactly right.
It all falls apart. So what was, what do you see as a timeline for when things return to, quote, normal and or not? Do they not?
So let's talk about housing as a perfect example.
And does gas is the same old story, right? Does that have much to do with COVID, or is that a supply and demand thing as we get back on the road?
It's a little bit of supply and demand. It's a little bit of a sudden surge. There's a little bit of an issue with OPEC not pumping more gas,
right,
and Russia not opening the spigots to Europe. So there's some of that, but there's also, we're in the midst of a transition away from carbon and towards other forms of energy, and I think that structurally, over the long haul, the cost of energy is going to go down as we move towards cheaper. Look at what's happened to the cost of solar over the past 20 years.
Oh yeah, I know, and I got it.
Oil is still where oil was, 10 and 20 years ago. It's not like oil is so much cheaper. It's not. Getting oil out of the ground is time-consuming, expensive, laborious. The thing that technology has done is allow us to access oil we couldn't reach before, but it hasn't made it all that much cheaper to get out of the ground. It's still expensive and dangerous.
The cost that it's created for the economy and climate. By the way, can I just ask you?
Sure.
One more kind of political economic question, which is...
By the way, none of this is political. All this stuff is
No, we haven't really talked about politics,
far.
but I want to just get your take on what we're hearing. I mean, I'm sure you like Steve Ratner, but he really pissed me off. I've interviewed him before.
No, I said that that last tweet last week was going to age like cheese left
Which
out
one?
in the sun.
I don't know what you're talking about.
He talked about, he wrote a column in the Sunday Times. I warned the Democrats about inflation. And I'm like, dude, you're just wrong. You got this wrong. None of this stuff is structural. All of this stuff is stuff that's related to the reopening. It's services versus goods. It's, so I mentioned how, so Ratner, I disagree with. By the way, he's a smart guy. Usually,
I don't know. I'm always torn. I feel like his analysis usually is not accurate. It doesn't come true. And he's.
I call him out. Say,
well,
hey,
I did today.
You said this 6 months ago, and you were wrong. Where's the mea culpa?
I did today because I am so terribly irritated by the waste of a conversation on whether or not we can afford the government spending proposals, the one that just passed the House, the Build Back Better bill. Yeah. Can we afford this?
I didn't see him talk about that. I saw him talk about inflation.
Well, talking about it whether what it does to, put pressure on prices, on inflation is a separate conversation. He's just talking about, can we afford this? And number one, it's, we have taxes. A lot of it's paid for. But more importantly, Barry, we can't afford not to invest in America for all the things that you and I have been talking about. What this does is such a game changer to our society, specifically to families with kids. And most importantly, this argument just blows my mind because we never argue or debate whether or not we can afford the military budget, which is so huge and bloated and so much waste. It does not have the bang for the buck that all of this proposed spending was. And I just cannot stand this conversation. Can we afford it? We never debate, can we afford the stupid waste of the Pentagon budget? That's what I want.
How about the tax cuts? Nobody brings up a question.
Can we afford the tax cuts and then the huge hole that they blow in the budget? Exactly. It's another great example.
So I thought he was wrong about inflation. I didn't. Again, the problem with experts is that they're experts in the way the world was previously when they developed their expertise.
They don't adapt.
But then the world moves on and they're left with their historical expertise. And it's really true. The fascinating thing about economists is that they have their formative years, and that leaves them a permanent mark. And so, when I see people talk about inflation, they're dealing with PTSD from the 70s. They haven't recovered from that.
I feel like that's what you just said is true of all arguments about economics. I've been covering it and talking about it for years, so I've just been taking in a lot of arguments which sometimes they make sense for this economy or this community or this country, but not for other times. But so many of these arguments are so lazy and have not borne out. And Larry Summers and Steve Radner, enough.
Yeah, it's very.
We've heard enough. Thank you. Thank you for your service.
I very much find that there's a group of economists of a certain age, about a decade older than me, and they've been obsessed with deficits and they've been obsessed with inflation. And I got to say on television a couple of weeks ago, I don't know. I've been hearing since I was a teenager that deficits were going to cause all these problems. They were going to cause inflation to go higher. They were going to crush the dollar. No one would lend to Uncle Sam or only lend at very high rates. It would crowd out private capital. I've literally been hearing that shit for 40 years. None of it has come true. How fucking wrong do you have to be before you admit your philosophy is intellectually bankrupt? And they can't, because they're waiting for Godot. They're waiting for the train to come around that's never coming.
Yeah, they're so lazy. They've memorized these arguments. They don't want to learn new things.
It's not laziness. It's worse than that. Laziness, I could just, really ignore.
Yeah.
It's that they have invested so much time and professional reputation and intellectual energy in creating a model of the world that it's cognitive dissonance when they see data that contradicts that model. They will not accept that the world isn't how they've imagined it. And so they double down and double down. Now, I'm not talking about the political hacks who, are in favor of deficits when they're in charge of the White House, but they hate deficits when they're out. Hold the faux deficit hawks aside. I mean the people who are true believers, who actually believe this dumb shit, and they just can't get past themselves. They just can't get around it.
Well, all right. Well, I guess we'll leave it there. Lots more to talk about, but I appreciate your hour today. Thank you very much for all of your insight. And I was listening to your Masters in Business. I'm really enjoying the podcast. Masters in Business. Is a great podcast. Barry Ritholtz, a great man. At Ritholtz. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, and I appreciate that we did not get too far off topic, because sometimes you nudge me into places that are just completely without.
You feel unsafe. I understand.
No, it's not unsafe. It's that I would rather stay with areas where I have an expertise.
Right.
And, like, I can talk about inflation. I know not a lot of people have the take I have and have done the homework on it. But when you ask me questions that sort of go into politics or
when you start talking
Trump's
about
taxes or the insurrection, I'm just another asshole with an opinion, and who cares? Right? Am I wrong? Isn't that true?
Certainly you are the expert when it comes to the issues that we discussed mostly today, and usually that's always been the case, and you always deferred away from those things when I was at Sirius, but as things have changed and we've gotten more and more comfortable, I do lead you to the water I'd like. So that's on me.
Since you brought up Sirius, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
If you got a phone call tomorrow from Sirius and they said, Pete, we want you to start coming in every day. We want to pay you a lot of money to host a show here in the city and give up your she shed and give up all the stuff you're doing with Patreon and all the stuff on the side, what would you say to them?
I think I'd have to say no because of the plan that I have for the next 3 years. I really want to try to implement this expansion and what I'm planning on doing and bringing on a couple people and doing my own thing is where I want to be. It would be tough. It would be a tough.
And now multiply that by millions of people who were sitting at home for the past 18 months, getting paid, not running up bills, and basically thinking about what they want to do with their lives. It's also and their careers.
It might sound
that's the great disruption right there.
Sure, it might sound weird, but I think for a lot of men, probably especially too, thinking about your physical and emotional health, and that a heart attack kills a lot of people around our age because of stress and because of thinking about how you want to spend the time. I think a lot about how I want to spend each day, much less week, month, and year of my life. I think a lot about that. And I don't want to spend it doing certain types of things. And I do want to spend it doing other types of things and with certain people, like I literally started walking every Wednesday morning with a friend of mine, Dr. Ken Zatz, who I'm making famous because we have it's Wednesdays with Ken. And I wouldn't trade it. Like there's certain things, and that's just one thing. So many things, the time I'm getting with my family, like that is where value lies for me personally.
There's a huge change that people have the ability to spend time with their family and not. We kind of all have this tendency of inertia, even if it's doing the same thing over and over again. And then when you have this interruption and you're not commuting every day, suddenly it's like, oh, commuting is a clusterfuck. It's a disaster. A giant time waste. And
it's tough. It's tough.
They've shown over and over again, people who spend a lot of time commuting directly correlates with lower levels of work satisfaction, life happiness, on and on. The longer you commute is, the less happy you are.
There was just no doubt that was the case. And when you provided your hypothetical and you mentioned, you'd have to be in the city all the time. Like it's literally a meditation or a yoga or a walk or any number of things that I can do because I don't have an hour each way. And the stress that comes with that as well. There's a lot that goes into that. And just, there's to a certain extent, driving in bad weather, like all that shit, thinking about dying a lot on the road is not where I want my mind to be. And my commute to the shed is I haven't slept yet.
That's really
all right, man.
funny.
Thank you.
My pleasure. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, there he goes. Barry Ritholtz at Ritholtz is his Twitter handle, where he's always active. Ritholtz.com, the website, the blog, the big picture, the book, Bailout Nation, and of course the podcast is Masters in Business, which is a big hit for the Bloomberg Network, where you can also see him appearing on the TV as a talking head, and he has a huge head, so definitely check it out. And let him know that you heard him here on the program. Always good. Always appreciated. And I hope you have safe travels if you're traveling. I will be headed up to Syracuse tomorrow. And tomorrow I'll also have on the program historian Kenneth C. Davis. And I've got scheduled Joe Madison, the Black Eagle of Urban Views, on a hunger strike to get voting rights restored and passed in the United States of America. The legend. Looking forward to talking with him as well. Friday, the big show with Dr. Aaron Carroll, where we recap the worst year ever, and he talks about how to cope with it all, as well as getting into some of the latest news about COVID and research and more. Really a great conversation that I've got for you then. But for now, that is it. Join us anytime if you're a stand-up subscriber, community member on the Discord platform. I might even light up a last-minute hangout on Thanksgiving night or Friday night. We'll see what the plan is and where I'm at. I don't want to make any commitments. But if If you're a member, you'll get an email announcing that. Could be spontaneous, and always love to see your faces virtually, if not in person someday. And one of those faces is the great John Carroll, community member of ours who is out doing gigs again and hooking up with another listener, Guthrie, bringing him to his venue, which is very cool. They shared those videos on social media, and John sang our song, which he's singing us out now. Grammy award-winning singer-songwriter. Here he is, John Carroll.
Imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to